All right, try this again. I never do this in one take, by the way. It'd be
Hey, you
terrible
come
on.
close.
I'm okay on live radio. I'm not okay on live anything else. Hello out there. I'm the oldest nerd. With me is Professor O, and we're talking movies once again. How you doing today?
I am great, doing well, and grateful to be here.
So am I. Especially, it took us a little while to get it connected today. But we're talking about Forbidden Planet, and connections have kind of a thing to do with it, don't they?
Oh, they absolutely do. So many connections in that incredible film.
I understand that that was probably one of the first big budget sci fi films, and it was so successful that it led to a number of things during the 50s. I was looking over some of these things that were kind of influenced by it. The Time Machine, War of the Worlds, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Day the Earth Stood Still, things like that. And it's
Absolutely.
yeah,
Probably
it
the
is. It
fly.
is.
Yeah,
It's arguably one of the best sci-fi movies there is.
it is. But the funny thing is, it feels almost, it feels a little forgotten. It feels underappreciated. It feels a little forgotten. People have these kind of a juvenile references to it. On a couple of podcasts, they'll kind of there's a smirking attitude toward it. I think it's one of the best science fiction films ever made. I think it's most forward looking and invested in science to an amazing degree.
Yeah, they get some of the science wrong. I think they said something about the ship or the monster putting off 80 million electron volts or something like that.
That's
And
interesting. I hadn't thought.
yeah,
I was just, but
and
what
electron volts are very small things. A mosquito puts out 80 million volts.
I
Oh,
did not realize
I
they got
read that.
as a Star Trek fan though. I know you're looking at all the things that they got right and all the things that influenced Gene Roddenberry. Of course, we can't. We probably well, you never know. We may never be able to go faster than the speed of light, but this film handles it in an intelligent way. And even the idea that you have to slow down, that if you're going faster than the speed of light, you have to process the body and slow down so that the body can, handle it. And they even mention that in a really fast way. Beginning of the film starts. We're fixing to come out of faster than light speed, and they call that, what do they're referring, they're referring to it as a oh, can't believe that slipped my mind, but they're referring to the slowing down process, and they use an abbreviation to refer to the slowing down
Yeah.
process.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. I've read about this as you have that the warp drive had to have something on there to keep people from being a stain on the back of the compartment, and they
Right.
even mentioned that I think somewhere in perhaps Voyager that without inertial dampeners they wouldn't be able to speed up or slow down fast enough.
They embed that so well into Star Trek, you kind of forget it's there. I had forgotten about that. I was reading a science fiction book by Kim Stanley Robinson, part of the slowing down process is a huge deal in that book. And the ability to even re-enter our solar system is a huge, and he's very science oriented science fiction writer. But then to see this in the movie, and apparently they turn the crew into energy. That's the kind of dampener. They turn the crew into some sort of greenish energy, and it looks totally like a transporter. I mean, you're at the beginning of that film. So
Also
many
looks
Star
kind of
Trek.
like yeah. Also looks kind of like the freezing tubes they had in Lost in Space.
Totally.
Maybe the
That's
same
exactly
effect.
right. Yeah. Very much so, and it lights up just like those few freezing tubes, and that's a great point. And then the whole, looking at Star Trek, the whole structure of the Federation, the idea that this is a federation of planets, kind of elusive, and they're checking on colonists on an expedition from 20 years. That so much Star Trek in there.
Yeah, and same thing. So much of Lost in Space, a lot of the visual aspects of it, the design of the bridge of the ship had this big
Right.
device in the middle, which they called the astrogator in Lost in Space, but they called the person operating it the astrogator in here.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
I had forgotten about that connect. I can't believe I forgot that connection, lost that connection to Lost in Space. The thing in the middle, the astrogator, with a replica of the ship, so that you really, it beautiful way of showing where you are in terms of yaw and pitch, and you can see the ship represented there. And yeah, you're right. Oh, I'll tell you one thing. As long as we're kind of going through a little chronologically, in a deleted scene that's just amazing, Leslie Nielsen criticizes I think his name is Fred. Good grief, the kind of the third in command. You have the engineer, you have Leslie Nielsen, you have the engineer who unfortunately was one of the first victims of Morbius's monster, and then you have the guy that was kind of a rival for Leslie Nielsen,
Yeah.
for the of
Yeah.
Altera, the rival there. Um, he is the navigator, and when they first, and they you can see this in the film, that they're hot when they arrive. As soon as they come out of those tubes, everything's really warm. Well, that's because the navigator has put them very close to the sun. And in the deleted scene, Leslie Nielsen, J.J. Adams, is furious about how close. He said, "Next time you're going to put us directly inside a sun." Just really criticizing the navigator. And the navigator says he's always a smart aleck, the rival for Leslie Nielsen's attention. You remember, rank has
Yeah.
its privileges, sir. He's really critical. And he says, well, Leslie Nielsen says, "You're going to put us inside a stun." And the guy says, "Well, I guess then you'll court martial me, sir."
That's funny. It makes me think of the reference that was made during Star Wars. If you don't program the computer correctly, you could end up running into an asteroid or a star. You remember that?
Exactly. And they deal with that concept. Just the idea that, coming out, so many, I mean, I love 50s science fiction films, and I think there are a lot of them that do treat trips to Mars. A lot of them are planetary trips, but they treat them as seriously as you can. But here we're looking at deep space,
Yeah.
and the idea that you've got to adjust your speed, and the human body's got to deal with that coming out of hyperspace, or coming out of faster than light, or that the navigation's got to be plotted so you don't end up in a sun. I mean, and then they got Asimov's rules of robotics, by the time we meet Robbie the robot, which is amazing.
They
too.
did, even though the poster for the show had the robot holding the woman in a menacing looking way, which wasn't in the film at all. But
Altera, and never
yeah,
happens in the movie.
no,
Yeah, and that was so not like Robbie to be threatening in the least bit. He was the kindest robot you're ever gonna come across, and I mean, the worst thing he did is maybe enable an alcoholic, the Earl
played by
Holliman.
Earl. Yeah, the later what Police Story, was that what he was in, or
That's
some kind of
right.
cop show? Yeah,
He had a good part in that show.
yeah, it did. I thought
Yeah.
it was well acted. Somebody else that you might not have recognized. He was not credited in the film. James Best. He later became Roscoe P. Coltrane on Dukes of Hazzard. He was the sheriff.
No, I did not know that. Was he just part of the crew?
Yeah, yeah, he was just a unnamed crewman.
Yeah, yeah. One of the, and another thing, you think of it feels like there's lots of things. Just remind when I was thinking of the crewman, it reminded me of the way Leslie Nielsen. Sometimes he wouldn't even necessarily. It's almost like, are they all in the same room?
I think so.
Does Leslie Nielsen really have to pick up a communicator to talk to the crew? Or it felt like all 20 guys are together in this one, but he picks it up. But it reminds you of the communicator. It was very much like a communicator and then they had
Yeah,
tricorder like devices. Yeah,
it looked like a condenser microphone. You could see the capsule in it. That probably had nothing to do with it, but you know,
it,
so good.
but it did. And those uniforms were incredibly well designed. When you think about it, there's tons of parts on those uniforms. There's all these flaps on the pockets, and and the community just seems like there's so much detail in the movie. It's astounding. Just and then the ideas of the film. And the one thing that kind of got me too was that the mystery of the film. Well, this connects to like the Star Trek, the Star Trek episode where we're looking at the what's it called, the man trap, and we're Captain Kirk is checking up on a colony that's kind of they lost track of. It's been maybe 4 years since they've heard from them, and that's like the people from the Belerathon here on Altair, on the planet Altair 4, I think. And so they're checking on them, and there's an aura of mystery that I just love in what happened to these people. And then when you meet Walter Pigeon, when you meet when you meet Morbius, then that's a real connection to uh, more mystery. What happened to the crew? What happened to the all the colonists? And it turns out that they have been killed. It's just an eerie film. To take it lightly, it does not treat itself lightly. It takes itself seriously, and the eeriness at the beginning is just so good. When we meet Walter Pigeon, what happened to the rest of the crew? They all died, torn limb from limb, leaving him as the only survivor. Of course, he's kind of sort of lying at the time because he's omitting his daughter. And then she has to walk in later and then astound the three crewmen, the Leslie Nielsen and the two other upper crewmen there. She's like, "Who is this?" But he's not going to admit. I think he was hoping to get rid of them all before the daughter walks in.
Yeah.
And
I
then, of
wonder
course,
how many
yeah,
Star Trek episodes were based on that because it was always somebody's daughter that the captain was getting involved with, do you recall?
I read that's right. There's one that is a third season episode that kind of ties to, oh gosh, the idea of Galileo, not Galileo. Do you remember the third season
Yes,
episode
yes, that
where
was his name was Flint, and he had this daughter who turned out, I think, to be an android or something. But
that's right,
yeah,
and he was a genius. But when wasn't he? He was almost like, wasn't he a robot that had been
no,
inter?
no, he was just an immortal. He had found himself on Earth, and he was Brahms, and he was also Da Vinci and various things, and would pretend to age and then change his identity, and finally went into space and found this place where he could be by himself. And he wanted to be by himself, and he didn't want anybody to know about his daughter. And then, strangely encouraged it once they did find out about her.
That's right. And she was Roddenberry. I know we're getting off track. We'll get back on track, but Roddenberry used that same plot in the Questor tapes, I think, where it's the idea of the Da Vinci's of our history were actually a chain of robots to help guide us through dangerous times in our own past. And the current robot is not functioning correctly. That's interesting. Yeah, being that they've taken that plot and reworked that, but that just goes to the influence of Forbidden Planet is just amazing. That is not to mention the Shakespearean side of things, that it kind of comes from the Tempest, and
Yes.
really has some parallels to the Shakespeare's play The Tempest, and then of course Morbius is he does not want the daughter to show up. She does show up. She says, "Oh, and you didn't tell me to. You said I couldn't show up during lunch, but you didn't say I couldn't come for coffee." And she's so smart, and she's like that teenager that just pushing the limits, and
Yeah,
so she
teenage
shows up.
logic.
Say it again.
Teenage logic. That's
Exactly.
here's what you
Totally
didn't say. Yeah.
impeccable. And she does that over and over. So she walks in, and of course, from that point, the plot thickens because all of a sudden Morbius, he already explained what had happened to his wife. His wife survives, but then dies of natural causes. The rest of the crew are just ripped to shreds. The last three, as they try to escape, great point of yours, in what looks like a saucer, from apparently spaceships at the time look exactly like saucers, like the Lost in Spaceship. They are killed as their ship tries to escape, and so this mystery deepens, and Morbius is so afraid that whatever that monster was is going to come back, and he tries to warn the crewmen off, do not come here, I'm fine, leave me alone. Then the daughter walks in, but of course they're smitten. They're, as they say repeatedly, we're 27 men with advanced IQs, and we're virile, and we've been lost in space, stuck in space for 385 days. What do you expect? and
That was the other thing I kind of liked about this. There, they indicated the voyage there took them pretty much a year,
Right.
and that's unusual. Usually, they move at the speed of script. Most of the earlier science fiction, Buck Rogers, for instance, going back to the 30s, he would they decided to go to Venus and they got there in like 5 minutes. And that's that this is a little more. It makes me think also. You were talking about how they speed up and slow down from hyperspace, and James S.A. Corey, if you've read any of his stuff, they have a whole way where everything works through physics except for the engine itself, which is something that is practically a perpetual motion machine. But beyond that, they have the drive of the rockets that holds them to some kind of artificial gravity. And then halfway through the voyage, they flip the ship around and then start decelerating, and it keeps the gravity going. The ship itself is built like a skyscraper rather than climb on like an airplane.
Wow, that is good science fiction. That kind of reminds me of all the trouble they had to go to in the Kim Stanley Robertson uh, story just to slow down. But the and I was thinking again of your even and here we're talking about the ships and the flying saucers. It just works incredibly well, and they were taking every detail, every thought of science fiction, so many ideas so seriously. Um, the slowdown. Oh, you mentioned how long it takes to get from one place to another, and that's one of my. You're right. One of my favorite Star Treks is the second pilot, and in the second pilot, where no man has gone before, that yet another influence on this. When you think about it, when they lose the warp speed capability, then Kirk describes how they're traveling right at sublight, but how long things take. And he mentions trips of hours have now been expanded to days and months. That's how long we're going to spend. And so they spent a year. And they weren't going they were going, I think, maybe 2 times the speed of light or 3 times the speed of light, not exponentially like Star Trek does, where they really can go really fast. But this
Yeah.
is more, it's going to take a year to get from one place to the other. And the other thing is fascinating too, kind of in the plot again, when Morbius says, "Look, leave me alone." Leslie Nielsen, J.J. Adams, American sounding, sounds like he had a relative that wrote the Constitution. But he says, "I've got to check with my commanding officers to see if I can leave you alone. You've been out of touch for 20 years. That according to my rules, my regs, I've got to reach my commanding officer to get a decision." And they're so far out, they have to get they have to basically kind of rummage through the ship, take equipment from the ship to superpower their communications so that they can get an answer in 10 days. And even it's going to take 10 days just to get an answer, and it's going to and they have to really modify all the communications equipment just to get the answer. And then Morbius sends Robbie to help him out with all those lead casing. But they are
Yeah.
it's so realistic.
It's true. And there was
Just
another thing that they set up their force field fence. And that reminds me of something else that
right.
they did in Lost in Space. Although how the force field worked in Lost in Space didn't matter because they
No.
did it a different way every time they used it.
Every time and that force field fence allows there's some we're jumping ahead a little bit in the plot, but that's when then we see the monster. Not going that far ahead in the plot, but then we see the monster that Morbius warns them of. If you stay here, I'm afraid. He mentions, I see this thing, I feel this presence of a monster at the edges of my consciousness, and if you stay here, it will come. So then they do stay, and the captain becomes infatuated with Altera, and one officer does at first and says and teaches her how to kiss. She's a biology. It's like she's a biology major, but has never seen another man. And so she just, oh, this is interesting. This is what you Earth people do. You call it a kiss. And so he's, I'll teach you more. And then the captain realizes he's taking advantage of her, but then he falls for her. And then in that time of going back and forth to their ship at night, the crew starts to be threatened by this creature that hits the force field, and it's the only time we see the monster, and it's a great looking monster.
It
Well,
really is. It looks kind of like a big sloth or something, but it certainly is menacing enough, isn't it?
yeah, they refer to it as some sort of mutated sloth. The doctor takes a reading of its footprints. It leaves huge footprints, and so then he does a plaster of Paris model of the footprints and says this is some sort of contorted straw. It's basically nothing that evolution would ever have created. The monster is so strange. He says basically the feet are made to walk on all fours, but it stands up like a biped, and which of course the monster's coming from Walter Pigeon's Morbius's head, which is
Right.
just another phenomenal thing about the film.
Yeah, I think they get more into science and psychology and things. They get some things wrong, but they certainly make it sound good,
They do.
and it works.
It were, yeah, it. I love the way, and of course, the 50s were not that far out from Freud, and we're as a society we're starting to take seriously Freudian psychology. And I use the film in a class to explain the id, the ego, and the superego,
Right.
because there's not many films that just break it down and explain it like that. And the explanation is just marvelous. And we hadn't even touched on the Krell. Okay, Walter Pigeon's secret. I say Walter Pigeon's
Right. They
Morbius.
didn't know what happened to the Krell, but it became pretty obvious what happened to them. They
Right.
had more power than they knew how to deal with, and then destroyed each other, pretty much as Morbius had done to his own crew.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So Morbius, and most people are here listening to us have probably watched the film and loved the film. But Morbius, this some maybe 18, no, 20 years ago, when he first encountered the Corel technology, he basically boosts his brain power, and it almost kills him. But he boosts his IQ and his ability to almost do what the Krell were doing. The Krell you gather they're 500,000 years old. That they had,
Yeah.
I think yeah, and they had been extinct. They died. The one night that they died on was at, I want to say, feels like 200,000 years ago. He says 2,000 centuries is that
Yeah.
night, that horrible night. They were trying to basically not have to do anything physically anymore. They were going to use, it's funny, the movie calls them instrumentalities, but you can also call them machines. They were going to
Yes.
design a machine that could move anything they want, pure thought control. But they didn't account that they, that they had evolved from, I think the way Morbius describes it, the wicked side of us, all the way going back to the Neanderthal man, that they had evolved from uh, the primitive also, and those primitive thoughts were still in their ids. They forgot they even had an id, and all of a sudden now all those thoughts are unleashed. The thoughts
Well,
that they didn't even
all good science
acknowledge.
fiction tells you something about yourself. And we like to think
Right.
of ourselves as evolved. We like to think of ourselves as beyond all of that primitive stuff, but it's still here, isn't it?
Oh, we just repress it. That's it. And so the Krell have, I think, forgotten that they were repressing it, and all of a sudden everything's all of us, it's all there. Or our ego, ideally according to Freud, our ego would deal with those thoughts from the id, the thoughts that I just want what I want right now. I am in the middle of a podcast and I want a candy bar and I'm just gonna leave it and go get it. That is an id thought. But then the ego says, no, in 30 minutes or so, we'll be done. And then you can get a candy bar. And then the superego, of course, is that part that deals with culture thoughts. Not only it's not practical right now to get a candy bar. What does that say about you being civilized and cultured. It's just not right. That's your super ego at work. And the Krell and Morbius completely forgot about all those things, and then unleashed those id thoughts, and there was no control. The Krell died in one night, and then Morbius is in any threats that come along to that perfect little civilization that he's got. The id is unleashed in the form of that incredible monster. I think animated by Disney, right? It was
Yes,
MGM all the
yes.
way, but they got some Disney animators. Yeah.
But I got to
To
say
and to
something about the design of Robbie the robot. Same
Oh yeah.
people did the Lost in Space robot, and I think some of the sets on both the. Oh, yeah, show you with the Robbie there. He's bigger in
And
the
there.
film. Yeah, actually, Robbie is a lot bigger than the B9 robot, right?
I
As
think
I
so.
as I
Yeah.
recall.
Right.
And it may be
And
just because they got a shorter guy to go into the B9 robot.
yeah. Oh, right. And 2,500 feet of wiring. You look at
Yeah.
that thing, and it's just. Let's see. This one actually works a little bit. This one is kind of. It's got does quite a few things.
Yeah.
And but of course, when you watch the movie,
Can it make its own alcohol?
I would take good craft beer. That's for right. Yeah. But what were you saying? It's that they had used the Robbie the robot they in
Yeah, they
MGM
used it in
production.
Lost in Space and showed him to be larger than the B9 robot. But of course, both of those robots are uh, costumes and
Right.
had to be very uncomfortable for the people in them.
Were they? Do you remember who the cost who did the voice in Lost in Space?
Voice in Lost in Space was Dick Twofield.
Oh man.
He was the announcer for the time tunnel, and he was the announcer for Space Patrol, which was on ABC radio and later on television. And so he was kind of a science fiction announcer.
That and those and they're guys in both side those right that in those are
Yes,
costumes.
yes. I don't remember the name of the guy that was in the costume in Lost in Space, but there was a
Bob
funny
May.
story that Bill Mooney told about it. They had to put him in it. Of course, he stood down into the pants, and then they assembled the shell over him, and he was down in there, and he had a little button to push when he spoke. He actually spoke the lines, and then they would dub in Dick Twofield later, and
Right.
so he was in there amidst all this 60s era electronics, which were hot and things like that. And one day, as a
Ooh,
practical
yeah.
joke, they decided that they were going to leave him in it when they went on a break. And he's going, hey, don't forget about me, and they leave. And so after a couple of minutes, they go back in and they say, let's let him off the hook. And they see smoke coming up out of the sides of the robot. And they said, oh Lord, he's dying in there. Something has caught fire, and he's all by himself. And so they go and they undo and pull the head off, and he's there with a cigar reading Variety.
You got him back.
Yeah, he
That's
did.
awesome.
He did.
Might as well. Yeah. That's awesome. That is awesome. The robot was an incredible effect. The other
Yes.
effect that's just crazy too. We're talking about the Krell when Morbius takes them down. He realizes now I've got to show. He kept on wanting to hide things, but then they Walter J.J. Adams and the doctor, the engineer. No, the doctor. Yeah, they go into
Yeah.
his study, and then Morbius comes out of the wall, and the wall connects up to the wonders of the Krell, and those special effects absolutely hold up to this day.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen. You know, you think of films that describe the future, some sort of incredible um, city or a planet that's in the future. That's got to be one of the most.
Yeah.
It's still breathtaking.
I think it is,
The
and
Yeah,
they you could tell where the money was spent on this. According to this,
yes.
they spent $1,900,000 producing the movie, which in 1951, that's got to
Woo,
be 100 million now, huh?
easy, easy. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, and you can tell where the money was, and just you really believe you're, and they had traveling mats with the three
Yeah.
actors as they're walking across these gigantic bridges, and we are looking over the bridge. We're looking 20 miles, or or no, 80. I'll just say 80 levels. I know, I know Morbius mentions that the machines extend 20 miles in either direction from his kind of central, from a point that he's at, but
Yeah,
then
he
it
says they
feels
go
like it
20
goes
miles
down.
that way and 20 miles the other way, and then says it's a cube, 20 miles by 20 miles. So he got his, I don't
Well,
know what he was pointing at. Maybe he was
yeah,
pointing
well,
at one of the
downward
vertical.
goes forever. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you're looking at this machinery, in just you don't know what it is,
Yeah.
that these lighted orbs and blocks go by up on like giant elevators, and they're huge. I mean, the men are tiny in relation
Yeah.
to these
Yeah.
giant the machinery, and you're just left aghast. It is fantastic. I mean, you really feel that the Krell were the most wondrous race you could have ever, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for all of the money they spent on these sets, they did do some cost cutting. When they first introduced Akira, she's in a garden, right? And
Oh,
this garden is a rebuild of the set for Munchkin Land in The Wizard of Oz. It's, of course, filmed at MGM.
that's right. I'd heard that. I did not realize that there was a rebuild of the set of Munchkin Land. That's incredible. And then they proceed to tear that set apart to a point when finally Morbius's monster id comes for them, because it will Morbius directing that, with his id directing the monster, will not stop until he destroys J the captain, and then of course you worry about the daughter, because once the daughter becomes committed to the captain, to JJ Adams, and really becomes, she says, I love him, I will not leave, even if I could, I cannot leave, then that monster id probably would even threaten her. And it goes through the garden, and then it goes through all the Krell machinery. The walls of the Krell are, impenetrable, but nope, that id, with using all that energy, can break through anything.
Well, I would point out you don't have any daughters. You don't understand just how violent a the father of a daughter would be.
Yes, there's a lot written on that, actually, that's funny. Yeah, There's a, and of course, he he probably pushed Morbius pushed the bonds of a beyond the bonds, perhaps, of a healthy relationship, with 20 years and nothing but the daughter and him. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, yeah,
it's a
there, and yeah. But that's an interesting point. I've just got boys.
yeah futuristic thing of the father cleaning his shotgun on the front porch. So that's kind of thing. Something else to talk about. This was one of the first movies that used completely electronic sound design. All of the music was done with electronic instruments, right?
Yes, and it's fascinating. It wasn't a theremin. A theremin sounded so cool, but they didn't use a theremin. They used complete electronic score, and and that's I, I'd have to do a little more research on this. We both done a lot of research on this film,
Yeah,
but apparently what we're watching is almost a work print. I mean, it's a cleaned up work print. They
yeah,
ran it to a test audience, and the audience fell in love with it, and apparently they fell in love with the music, and any changes that the yeah, of course, yeah, the electronic score, any and there might have been a composer, but any changes in the music, they refused to change anything. In fact,
yeah,
there's kind of some funky jump cuts in the film, because MGM said this test audience loved the film. Let's go with this electronic score. It's going to be edited as is, even if there were some micro changes to be made. We're not going to do them. We're going to print this thing, and yeah, so the electronic score stuck, and it is fantastic. It just works. I love a good score. I love
yeah,
Jerry Goldsmith, and great, and James Horner, and great composers.
yes.
But this electronic score just works.
Yeah, another thing, how Walter Pidgeon was a fairly big actor at the time that this was made, but really, while he had done, I don't know, 100 films since the silent era, he
Right.
really wasn't a lead in anything until, I don't know, 1940 with
Yeah,
How
I
Green Was
remember
My
him from.
Valley,
That's the one I
and
was going to
then
mention. Yeah,
right, and
exactly.
then this
Fantastic in that.
and Funny Girl later, and then he was back to supporting parts and TV appearances and things like that. It seems a waste to me that somebody that good was never a leading man. I don't know what would have. I guess MGM had just so many leading men characters that some people who were too good to be character actors became character actors.
That's a good point. But and it's funny in a book that we both enjoy. This is my yellow copy of the Keep Watching the Skies by Bill Warren, and he felt that Walter Pigeon apparently Walter Pigeon what felt like if he felt he kind of was responding to the patina of science fiction at the time that it's not to be taken seriously. It's a juvenile film, and
Yeah,
so he wasn't necessarily that proud of it. I'm hopefully, and Anne Francis kind of had the same reaction, but apparently Anne Francis by the 70s started to realize what a cult favorite it was and how the film had been was appreciated, and she apparently really enjoyed the film. It kind of changed, and Bill Warren. I most of the time I'm like 100%, most 99.9 agreeing with what Bill Warren says, but he felt Walter Pigeon didn't put his uh, all into the acting effort. But that never had bugged me. I thought it was a pretty good effort. I mean, he's got that, that deep voice.
yeah,
Yeah, I love it when he comes in the room and he says, and he sees them in his office, and they're in his office, and nobody's invited him in. Nobody's supposed to be in his office, and he says, "The good silver's in the bureau, and and my daughter's jewelry's in a room." Just that, like you guys
yeah,
that are stealing my stuff, and that's just a tiny part of his gravitas.
yeah.
What did you think?
Well, they said the same thing, of course, on the um, um, doggone can't think of the actor's name. It always drops out. Who played Obi-Wan Kenobi? It was he practically phoned it in, but it was still a very memorable performance.
Exactly,
And
exactly, and
I think
I
sometimes a downplayed performance is just what's called for. They did that going back to Star Trek in Star Trek Two, which is considered the best of their of the Kirk and Spock era. They rehearsed Shatner to the point to where he was too tired to actually do the third balcony type of acting he was doing, and would just kind of hoarsely put out his lines, and it actually worked. It made him look
whoa.
more in character.
It did. That's a good point.
Yeah,
That's a really good. Yeah, Alec Guinness, and Alec Guinness
Alec
is
Guinness.
he's fantastic in that part. I just can't imagine him in another way. I can't imagine Walter Pigeon another way. And your point about Kirk is so good because when you think about Kirk for the first time is needing those reading glasses and he's aging, and that's a key part of that film. And so
Yes.
if they rehearsed him, if they over rehearsed him, good for them, because that put him in the character he needed to be in that film.
Right, and I mean, he was. I think sometimes that he is a little too tortured by fans as to his acting style because it is kind of this jump out of the screen and grab you by the neck kind of thing. But in '60s TV, where most people had 12 to 20-inch screens, you had to do that to get noticed.
A good point. That's a good and the star of a TV show, and he ended up later competing with Leonard Nimoy as to who gets the most lines, and that became.
Mhm.
But the star of a TV show, that's what they did. They just came out. They did come out and grab you, and Kirk Shatner was no different than any other.
That was the
And
reason they wanted to get rid of Jeffrey Hunter. He was too low key.
okay, I did. I always wondered. Yeah, I did not know that what had happened. So it was they basically decided he's too okay and to replace him then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, I know when I run this film for students, uh, when they see Leslie Nielsen, they're kind of taken aback. But I
Leslie
think he does a
Nielsen, of
good
course,
job.
was only dramatic parts until Naked Gun, and he had an entire career behind him, always playing the head of chambers in the law office, or the police commissioner, or the mayor, or the governor, or in this case, I mean, this was probably the most swashbuckling part he's never had.
Yeah, he is one tough captain. I mean, the Earl Holliman just barely gets away with discipline
Yes.
because because he had Robbie make all the liquor, and but the one thing that saved Earl Holliman is that gave Robbie an alibi because they were thinking
Right.
Robbie was the mysterious killer, but Earl Holliman could vouch that nope, Robbie and I were drinking away the night, and,
I kind of
and
like the
it,
way that he slapped Robbie on the back and said, ow. Just, that's the kind of thing that you'd see in more modern films.
yeah, that's it's a it's funny that this another quibble. Bill Warren, he loves the film, but another quibble you had with the film is any attempt at humor. He just felt like, and Earl Holliman did not like this part apparently, and God bless him, he's made fun of all the time in the film. I mean, they have this magnetic early in the film. They have uh, before you meet Robbie the robot, even they disembark from the ship, and they've got a tractor that's part of their disembarkation setting up stuff, and the tractor's got a magnetic arm, and so they move the arm, this giant electromagnetic arm, over the cook, and it just pulls Earl Holliman up by the butt, and then they dispense him, and that's we're supposed to laugh at that. I kind of felt for Earl Holliman. But he played the part with such conviction. It's okay. It just it kind of it's it doesn't it kind of works for me. I thought their attempts at humor weren't too bad, and you
Well,
needed
young actors
something.
have to pay their dues.
Boy, did they ever. That's the but one thing we've been talking about just real quickly, this Bill Warren, I noticed in his write-up, I just had one paragraph. He talks about which where the film had been called juvenile. He said in reviews, some reviewers had called it juvenile. He said, which brings us to the charge of juvenility. It could easily be argued that a central theme of Forbidden Planet is repressed incest. Morbius desires Altera, his daughter, but he's only aware of this in his dream. But even if that's only a sub theme, the darker side of parental relations is certainly a major element, as are sexuality, dreams. These are all themes in the film.
Yeah.
Ultimate goals of technology, the id versus the ego and the superego, loyalty, tragic muses of science, though Forbidden Planet is basically proto technology, and others. In fact, Forbidden Planet resonates like a stuck, like a struck gong with strong ideas and themes. The more you look, the more you find. And unlike many similar movies, the ideas are really there. The critics do not impose these ideas on a hapless little entertainment film. So he says, far from being juvenile in every important way, Forbidden Planet is one of the most mature and sophisticated science fiction films ever made. It was the best science fiction of the film of the 50s. And then, but he's so right. And even now to hear people talking about it as, oh, what a fun little film. Did we watch the same film? I mean, that film is,
No, compared to the most of the stuff that you saw during the era, even some of the stuff that came after it, there was a lot of cardboard and rubber monsters.
oh God, it's so not like, and I love a good rubber monster. The Creature from the Black Lagoon is a
Yeah.
fantastic film. But then there's bad rubber monsters, and I get in mode of forgiving all that. I just enjoy the story. I love science B movies from the 50s,
Yeah.
so I enjoy them all. But this is so far from the rubber monsters. I mean, they took this thing so seriously. Even the tiger, when it jumps, and Altera, in the plot, the daughter has no friends. There's nobody else but a father and daughter are there,
Yeah.
but there's some animals to entertain Altura, a deer and maybe an elk, and then a tiger also, and that's an interesting use of matte screen, where the
Yeah.
the tiger or the yeah, because it's a real tiger, and but it's they play it where it's her friend, But then after she kisses the captain, and this is fascinating, after she kisses the captain, the tiger attacks, and she says, "It didn't recognize me." And it's just so fast. No, Altera has become a woman, and the time, much like Morbius's id, the tiger didn't recognize her anymore. She has changed as a being, and I thought that was such a neat. And Leslie Nielsen, she says it didn't recognize me, and Leslie Nielsen says, "You don't understand," and she says, "No." And Leslie Nielsen, he doesn't explain it, but he understands what has happened to her.
Yeah, probably in that area you couldn't talk too much about that. It surprises me how far they went with the almost nude scene in the pond where she's actually wearing something. It's just flesh
Exactly.
colored.
You can see it so easily that it's when she comes out of the water that it's a flesh colored suit. I almost wondered if they let us see that so that they could get by the censors. I guess, I mean, we're right at the
Absolutely,
edge,
they did. Yeah,
yeah, of the production code. We're right at the, and then, yeah, you're right. And there was, there's a lot of stuff. And yeah, they're pushing the limits. Of apparently the designer of the outfits had designed, oh, I was trying to remember. Anyway, she would design some of Hollywood's most outstanding suits,
yeah.
and she designed that the outfits for Altera. And yeah, you're right. They put those push the limits too. Oh, the miniskirt. This
Oh yeah,
the the film was banned in I think it was Spain until 1966, banned for 10 years because Altera is wearing a miniskirt in 1956, and you don't see miniskirts until in our culture until like 8 years later.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Obviously, they were ahead of their time on costuming.
yeah, they were as they were on so many things. Yeah.
But anyway, I find this to it's one of these kind of things that surprisingly has kept its relevance through the years. I think you could watch this and it would stand up fairly next to just about any other sci-fi that we've seen. It does have its the haircuts and the language, various things might have some dating to it, but as far as the look of the film, the story of the film, the effects in the film, I think that it could stand up pretty well to anything we have now. Don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I think that there's and of course we're looking at the edge of second wave feminism where it's funny, science fiction, you get so many of those films in the 50s with a woman scientist, and a lot of times the
Yeah.
woman scientist had a man's name like Pat or something like that,
Right.
but there was a woman scientist really pushing her way, trying to using her intellect and pushing her way forward. She was always kind of circumvented a little bit or overshadowed by the male scientists, but still it was fantastic that there was a woman scientist. But Altera is not quite created like that. She's not a scientist. She's just, but on the other hand, she's very educated. She has
Yes.
studied and studied and studied. And she has this, she carries, like you said, she carries that teenager spunk, that spark and spunk, and pushes it to it's like she kind of, with the guys who are constantly trying to take advantage of her in some respect, it's like she kind of knows, like, yeah, I know you're trying to do that, and I'm just going to beat you at your own game. She kind of has a, and I don't know if it's Anne Francis or in the script, but there's a spark to her that really speaks a little bit of some feminism.
Yeah, I think that we probably are starting to think about that stuff because this is post-war era. It's only
Right.
been 5 years since the end of World War II when there were a lot of women in that had all the men off to war or most of them and had to take on points of responsibility. And so I
Rosie
think
the
that was
Riveter.
probably, yeah, I think that was probably the beginning of the idea when everybody came back that they were expected to go back into the kitchen, and not all of them did.
No,
And
not all of them were happy to do that. Yeah,
no,
that's exactly.
no, I don't blame them. And so that's reflected, I think, in this a little bit, and I think we've seen it in other places. Certainly during the '60s, we saw it a lot. Roddenberry, who otherwise treated women pretty much like furniture in most of the Star Trek episodes, at least in the pilot, had number one Number
Right.
one, who was a smart and pretty, let's see, how could we describe her? She was an authority figure. She was very smart. She didn't let emotions get in her way, mostly.
Straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah, very straightforward. And of course, that the network had to get rid of her, and
Unfortunately,
so
she was
they change
great.
her into the nurse who's pining after Spock. And I thought that was probably the worst casting in the world. We like, of course, Majel Barrett, but obviously that was just a ploy to keep her on the show. She could
Right.
have done so much better. And
Right.
and
And
certainly
Strange New
later as
World was.
Loxana Troy, she played the Annie Mame character perfectly, I thought.
Oh, that
But
was that. You're right.
yeah,
And the character is great in Strange New Worlds. They finally
yeah,
figured out, feels like, how to handle things. And number one also in Strange New
yes,
Worlds, they figured out how to handle that too. I got one more little thing from Bill
okay,
Warren. This is shorter, but he mentions the idea, just the science fiction in this thing is just amazing. We're talking about the transition from faster to slower than light travel in the film. It's nicely dealt with in a well thought out sequence. Apparently, at the point of transition, the crew are temporarily transformed into energy to enable, kind of like a transporter,
yeah,
to enable to pass them through the light barrier unscathed. To the uninhabited, this simply looks colorful. To those already familiar with science fiction, the use of the idea created mental orgasms. So if you were a science fiction fan back then, you were going like, I cannot believe this.
they now
It's
call
so,
that geeking
so
out, I
amazing.
think.
Say that again. Yeah,
I,
geeking
that,
out.
that geeking out, yeah.
Totally. You are geeking out in 1956. I would have, oh, that was 2 years before my time. I would have loved to have been part of that audience.
Yeah, I think perhaps we should leave it right there. I don't think we can top this one. So
Good point. Yeah. We pushed our limits as far as the code will let us go.
thank you once again for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. Can't wait.
And remember, you can subscribe to the channel if you will. Just click on that and ring the bell, and you know, send us what is the thing in on Facebook where you could send somebody
Instant message.
no. It was in this little game that they had where it seemed to be the only thing you would send someone a goat.
Ooh, that I don't know.
Yeah, it was some game everybody was playing when Facebook was
Right.
still fairly new, and I had when I was still on Facebook, people would say, we'd like to send
I
you a
was
goat.
slow to adapt.
I never wanted a goat,
Yeah.
not even a virtual one. Oh well.
you are a goat in my book. Greatest of all time, sir.
Thank you so much. So why don't you join us? You can subscribe to the channel below and ring the bell so you'll know when our next video comes your way. And until next time, don't go far.